Ernie, who will talk about the theological end of leading mission-focused and values-driven organizations. And Mike will take the practical end of that topic. So let me introduce you to Mike and Ernie. Ernest Simmons is professor of religion and director of the Dovry Center for Faith and Learning at Concordia College. He's an ordained ELCA pastor. He holds a PhD in religion from Claremont Graduate University in California and an MDiv from Luther Seminary. Simmons served parishes in Minnesota, California, and North Dakota prior to coming to Concordia in 1979. His publications include articles on the theology of Martin Luther, issues in science and religion, and the relation of faith and learning in higher education. He's a recipient of Templeton Foundation Awards for his coursework and writing in the field of science and religion. He is author of the book Lutheran Higher Education, and most recently, The Entangled Trinity, Quantum Physics and Theology. And by the way, he actually makes that understandable. He currently serves as president of the editorial council of the scholarly journal Dialogue, a journal of theology. And Mike Slette is well known to many of you. He has served as president of Oak Grove Lutheran School since June 2011. His career spans 3 years in public accounting, starting in the 70s, 27 years with Great Plains Software / Microsoft from 1982 to 2009, and then as co-principal of Great Outcomes Consulting, LLC. Slette held a variety of leadership roles at Great Plains Software, Microsoft, in finance, human resources, business development, and university relations. Slette is a COBA with a bachelor's degree in business administration focused on accounting. He has served on the board of a variety of organizations in the area, often helping these organizations become more mission-focused and values-driven. Slette and his wife, Kim, have 4 grown children and reside in Moorhead. Welcome Mike to this podium to get us started. I mean, Ernie.
We're easily confused. He's the good-looking one. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you all today and to have a chance to share some reflections and also hopefully engage in some time of dialogue. And so for that reason, I'm going to stay fairly close to a text so that I don't run over. You know, that I normally speak in 70-minute intervals, so I won't inflict that on you at this point. I've titled my brief remarks today, Vocation as the Nexus of Faith and Work. And I'd like to begin with a question. And like many important questions in life, its simplicity does not bespeak its complexity and its profundity. It's the very simple question, why are you here? That question was first put to me almost 50 years ago by a summer guidance counselor as I attempted to pre-register for my first quarter at college. It had not been intended to provoke existential anxiety. Students have enough of that already. But rather as a pro forma inquiry into my possible course of study. The question stuck. And I've repeated it countless times in my life as my life's journey has taken me to different parts of the world, to one too many committee meetings, and eventually to the other side of the lectern. It's that question which I would like to use to provide focus for our reflection on vocation as the nexus of faith and work. Why are we here? I will focus primarily on Luther's thought for these brief remarks, not only for the sake of time and also because his thought is expressive of the wider Christian tradition and foundational for the Protestant Christian understanding of vocation. Clearly, there are also resources in other faith traditions and other religions, but time wouldn't permit me to go into those. Luther was a relational thinker. For him, one relates to God through faith and to the neighbor through love. This is the inner and the outer person referred to in one of his most famous and short treatises, The Freedom of a Christian, which some of you might be familiar with. Coming out of that tension between the inner and the outer is the expression that the Lutheran sensibility in life is that life is paradoxical, a dialectical tension in the midst of which one must act and live. Life need not be simple and clear in order to be livable and intelligible. Drawing upon Luther's model of simultaneity for the Christian life, such as simul peccator, simultaneously justified and a sinner, such a dialectic, a movement between contrasting positions, can create within vocation a dynamic tension between faith and work. My point today is that the Christian understanding of vocation maintains a dialectical tension between two dimensions of life: existential meaning found in faith and practical engagement expressed in service to the neighbor, primarily through one's work. Both of these dimensions are contained in the simple question, why are you here? So let's unpack that a little bit. Dialectic, this dynamic movement of contrasting positions, stands at the heart of the Lutheran tradition precisely because Luther refused to separate the life of faith from life in the world. Luther insisted on the Christian life being lived right in the midst of the world, so that the resources of faith must be brought to bear on daily work and life, not in some separated, ostensibly more holy or religious sphere such as a monastery. This simultaneity gives rise to two realms in Luther's thought: the realm of today, the natural world, governed by the civil use of the law and guided by reason, and the realm to come, the kingdom of God, governed by grace and guided by faith. For him, the Christian lives in the interface, the overlap, by being in the world but mindful of a world to come. The Christian lives in both worlds simultaneously. And this is that dynamic witness coming home to roost in our daily lives. This witness sustains dialogue and does not fear a slippery slope into secularity. Rather, it is all of life, including that which is sometimes labeled secular. It is part of God's creation, after all, which must be brought into dynamic relationship with faith and the potentially transforming grace of God. The Lutheran tradition's emphasis upon vocation is one way to give theological grounding for such responsible, engaged relationship and leadership, which I'll get to later. So let us turn back to that question. Why are you here? It can be understood as involving two distinct but interconnected dimensions. The first dimension is the practical. Why are you here? Namely, why are you working at the place you are currently employed? What are you doing now, and why are you doing it there? This is the realm of practical engagement with life on a daily basis. The first dimension of the question is of that kind of here and now variety. But the second dimension cuts much more deeply. Why are you here? That is, why do you exist? This is the existential dimension of the question, the dimension that focuses on the nature and the meaning of human life and human existence. Why are you here and not someone else? Why did you come into life or existence at all? Where did you come from and where are you going? Those kind of questions that sometimes come up at 2 in the morning on the so-called dark night of the soul. The practical is composed of the necessary factors of place, history, resources, and structure. The existential is composed of the philosophical and theological dimensions of human existence. In a rather simplified manner, one could say that the practical dimensions address instrumental questions of value, means, while the existential dimension addresses questions of intrinsic value, ends for human life. The point is this: vocation occurs at the intersection of these two dimensions of the why question. Vocation addresses the practical from the context of the existential. It seeks to connect purposes and practices, ends and means, and not allow them to fall apart into separate realms. Why are we here? Luther's answer was vocation. It is through our vocation in the world that we incarnate faith and by so doing help sustain the very creation which gives us life. Vocation rejects the separation of the material from the spiritual, of nature from grace, of fact from value, insisting that they be kept together. There are, of course, however, strong forces in our time seeking to separate these two and produce a purely secularized, material, and instrumental understanding of vocation. From the beginning of the Enlightenment through the middle of the 20th century, it had become common to speak of a separation between fact and value, science and religion, nature and history. Nature as object had no intrinsic development, but was rather to be understood through scientific analysis and a value-free inquiry where both human and religious purposes were to be considered irrelevant. That was certainly how physics was explained to me in my first semester of physics as an undergraduate. History, on the other hand, was a realm of human purpose and religious value in which civilizations rose and fell, charting their course and dominating an impersonal world. I have come to understand this as a false duality. In fact, it lies at some of the tragic heart of what we now call modernity from our now present perspective of postmodernity. History would not exist without nature, and nature itself has a history. After all, we do have natural history museums around the country. So I agree with the educator Parker Palmer when he says that epistemologies, that is, ways of knowing, of comprehending, have moral trajectories. Ways of knowing are not morally neutral, but morally directive. Ways of knowing necessarily include ways of valuing, so a complete separation of fact and value is not possible. All facts are value-laden, for it is precisely the values embedded in interpretive systems that permit the conversion of raw data into meaningful fact. That is the function of theories, models, and paradigms, whether it be in sciences, humanities, or in business. This condition of the presumed separation of fact and value, combined with flux, impermanence, and mass media marketing, has led to a collapse in some respects of natural cultural frameworks, the historic mega-narrative or meta-narrative that informed our social fabric. Today, this challenge to the framework of meaning is not only local and national, but it's also global. The problem here is not with a secularized sense of vocation, but with only a secularized sense, that is, a non-dialectical one, which does not relate vocation to the tension with faith and hope. It is hope and the role of the transcendent future grounded in this hope that can stand in critique over the present. It is in light of what might be that one can become empowered to challenge and change what is. That vision of the possible, which breaks us free from the solipsism and the regularity of the present moment. It's the ground of vision. Christian vocation gives one the power to seek more humane, just, and peaceful alternatives in the world of today. A more complete understanding of Christian vocation would permit the relating of faith and career in a dialectical fashion, as all faith is related to life. This, in turn, will begin to provide a basis for transcendent critique of the values of our society and one's place within them. One can only critique a position from another position. One can critique a worldview only from another self-conscious worldview. Faith empowers a worldview to empower that critique. The Lutheran understanding of vocation empowers for public service and can serve the common good. Certainly Luther's proposal of the common chest, as it was called, is a clear 16th century example of such a pursuit. He was concerned to provide for the poor and needy as monasteries and convents, the historic source for such care, were being closed. Luther invented the community chest found on the Monopoly board. You'll never look at Monopoly again the same way. Not only public education, but also social service organizations were a direct result of the Lutheran Reformation as it then expanded out. Our educational systems, accordingly, were initially organized to offer institutions for instruction for leadership in such programs and institutions, including the church. It is education for the common good. But the common good for any given situation must be discerned through dialogue and mutual participation by all parties involved. Vocationally inspired leadership will seek such dialogue and not just presume that I know what's best for you and impose it with or without your will. In conclusion, the human question of why always hangs suspended between the finite and the infinite. Juxtaposed between time and eternity, humanity seeks meaning before its own beginning and after its demise. Part of the grandeur of being created in the image of God, of humus, soil, the root word of humanity, becoming spirit-breathed and self-conscious, is the ability to ask the question, why? Human beings are meaning-seeking creatures, but human beings live their lives in the dash inscribed on the grave marker between the date of birth and the date of death. Existential thinkers such as Luther invite us to contemplate our life in that dash and how and why we live it. Do we rush through it? Do we dash through our dash? Or is there time for quiet, pause, time for frolic, time for the dust to settle? I find it interesting that such a terse and cryptic symbol comes to represent all the hopes and dreams, successes and failures, joys and sorrows of a human life. Perhaps its very brevity bespeaks the nature of our time. But when we come to see that faith is a verb, there were two historically medieval terms, fides qua creditur and fides quae creditur, the faith which is believed in the process of believing. So faith is not just a noun, an object of devotion, it's also the process of having faith, the dynamic nature of the verb of faith. When we come to see that faith is a verb, a doing, an expressing, we can begin to engage life with a more holistic perspective. While our feet are of the clay, our eyes and minds scan the stars. Humans exist juxtaposed in what I like to call the mesocosmic, the cosmic middle between the microcosmic and the macrocosmic of the universe. Structurally, our brain is just about midway between them. We find our place between quarks and quasars in such a fashion as to contemplate both. We are an example of the universe become self-conscious and able to reflect on time before and after our own existence. This is what theologians at least partially mean by saying that human beings are created in the image of God. We are a form of incarnation where the spiritual is made manifest in the material, precisely in the transcending of self-interest. Nicholas Berdyaev, the great Russian novelist, once observed, "To eat bread is a material act. To break and share it is a spiritual one." Spirituality expressed in faith is opening up to the needs of the other, to transcendence of the self, and to seeing that it is connected to the material dimensions of life. The life of faith gets most clearly manifested in how we relate to others through our actions and relations in the world, that is, through our work. Vocation is where these two critical dimensions of human life unite. Vocation is expressed, I think, most clearly as the nexus of the existential meaning, the purpose of one's life, and the practical engagement with others that one has within life. Why are we here? Ours is a time of rapid and widespread change, not unlike the time of the Reformation in the 16th century, where systemic change, wholesale change on many different levels, political, economic, religious, intellectual, are all occurring simultaneously. Reflecting upon this dual dimension of vocation as the nexus of faith and work can hopefully empower us for dedicated service as well as constructive change in our own time of revolutionary change. Thank you.
Well, thank you to Ernie for doing exactly what we talked about several weeks ago, which was to say, let's trade off here, and let's lay the groundwork in a philosophical, theological, theoretical way, and then Mike, you try and take it from there and apply it in a practical way. So I will attempt to do that. First of all, it's so fun to be here today. I have thoroughly enjoyed, like I hope many of you, the series that began several years ago, all around this idea of integrating faith and work and looking for that integration, that cross-section. And I only hope that today I can build upon some of the ideas that have been shared here. So thank you to Faith for the opportunity, to Dr. Paul Dovery, who kicked this off several years ago, and I know was also part of getting me here. I also want to say, choosing Friday the 13th to be here, we're sort of glad to take one for the team, Ernie and I, but we hope that you have a good day and walk away with just some ways to think about integrating into your organization mission-focused and values-driven spirit. If you've been on a board with me in the last 25 years or so, if you've been on a consulting engagement with Leanne Wolf and me, if you're a colleague as part of the Oak Grove community that's here, you'll understand when I say I'm a mission and values-driven guy. And as I think of mission and values, it's not the only key to success for an organization, but to me, it's a mandatory part of that success. And I was going to say too, the Microsoft guy, the Great Plains guy, you'd expect to do just this whiz-bang PowerPoint. Not today. All right, so we're going low tech, and in a way of just trying to capture some of these thoughts, a few of my colleagues here helped to create just a piece that is at your table, and we'll walk through that eventually. But I guess if you think of sort of the premise for where I start, it's this idea that was written on the front here, that a clear statement of mission is critical for establishing why the organization exists in the first place. To build off of Ernie's question of why are we here? Why is this organization here? And then the value of shared values comes out in a description and sort of a groundbreaking understanding of how that mission gets carried out. So I'm going to walk you through sort of 30 plus years of experience that has brought me to this place. And what I'm going to do is share two stories. As Faith indicated, much of my career was with a company called Great Plains Software. It was if I look back now, it's a little bit of ancient history, being I started there in 1982, but that'll be part of a high-tech startup that built I think part of its legacy around mission and values. The other is to contrast it to where I am today at Oak Grove Lutheran School. But as Faith said, a little background on me, I'm an accounting major. And I could go into a little dialogue on the value of a liberal arts education, because at the heart of who I am, I'm a bean counter. But it's taken me a lot of different places. And I see Linda smiling back here too. It's a part of who I am, but it by itself doesn't define me. It was about 2 years into my public accounting career in Minneapolis where I got a call from a Cobber classmate, Joe Larson. And the interesting thing is, as I stand here today, I am drawn back to sophomore year at Concordia when I lived on this part of the campus, and Joe Larson, Roger Turner, Brad Eden, and I, sort of two roommates, ate dinner together almost every night. So in this idea of life through the rearview mirror, I look back and go, wow, there was a connection that sort of played itself out in some pretty astounding ways over the years. But I was an accounting major, and working in the Twin Cities, I get a call from Joe Larson. How many of you knew Joe? A neat guy, just a thinker. I would call him an entrepreneur at heart. Stories told that he ran a lawn mowing business in high school. That doesn't mean that he mowed lawns, but he ran a lawn mowing business, if you know what I mean. And I remember him telling me once that most families sat around the dinner table at night and talked about their favorite sports team. His family talked about the price of gold. My family wouldn't have related to that. But that was Joe. And early on, they decided to start a software company. First a computer company, and then very quickly a software company. They made some strategic decisions that were beautiful. They chose to develop software in such a way that when Apple developed a hard drive, which to us sounds like, it is ancient history, they almost overnight ended up with hundreds of resellers across the United States. Pretty amazing. But when I think about business in Joe Larson, I think of just business. I have tried to come up with a word that sort of describes what it meant to work with Joe, and I would just call it transactional. And not in a bad way, but it was, well, transactional. It was about taking orders, shipping product, collecting cash, and away we went. And when I came in May of 1982, we were a few days away from actually closing the first fiscal year. And lo and behold, when I got all those books put together, we had recognized about $500,000 of revenue in the first year. How many of us as entrepreneurs would be happy with $500,000? It wasn't a bad start. But Joe quickly realized that just the way he looked at business, he needed a VP of marketing. And so we went out and sought one. And what Joe quickly found was the only thing more unique than being a software company in Fargo, North Dakota, was that he kept running into this name about a Stanford Business School grad who was also from this region of the world. You'd all know him as Doug Burgum. And so once Joe got to know about Doug, it became, in very short order, a process of bringing him into the company. Now, it was only a matter of months after Doug got there that Joe's transactional, opportunistic, entrepreneurial spirit kicked in, and he decided that it was time to sell the company. And we entertained some really neat people from around the high-tech business at the time, but the best offer that he got was actually from Doug Burgum and Doug's family business. And in a sense, the rest is history. But it would have been March of 1984 when Doug took over. And when I think about Doug taking over as CEO of the organization, it wasn't just a change in leader, it was a change in leadership. The art of leading, if you will. And so if business for Joe was transactional, business for Doug Burgum at the heart was relational. And those of you that know Doug would know that he didn't come into our organization as a seasoned executive. I mean, he's a bright young man. Doug's 2 months older than I am, which just says when you get into an organization in 1982, you don't have much under your belt, period, to say anything about running an organization. But Doug had incredible natural instinct. He had some friends that went to grad school with him that were already in high-tech businesses like Scott McNeely. But I think the biggest influence on Doug, which eventually then affected our organization, was the fact that he had an 80-year-old family business that at the time was called the Arthur Farmer's Elevator. And Doug would talk about how that elevator had built 80 years of tradition on this idea of customers for a lifetime. In fact, here's a quote even today from this same organization. While some businesses treat their customers like there's no tomorrow, we'll treat you with the same character that will be in favor for generations to come. Customers for a lifetime. So under Doug's leadership, we chose a path that was around customers for a lifetime. And one of the first things it seems we did was to say, to kind of create this idea of why are we here, we developed a mission statement. And that's where I'm going to take you to the first inside fold of this little handout, which says that we described our reason for being there to improve the lives and business success of partners and customers. Pretty broad-reaching, pretty high, lofty goals. Some might say, how in the world could you as a business hope to improve the lives of people? But that's why we decided we were there. And I guess the one experience that I had throughout this whole time was that we worked really hard to be way more about high touch than we were about high tech. And here's how some of those things showed up. In an industry that had end users, we had customers. In an industry that sold product through resellers, we called them partners. And in an organization where you typically have employees, we called them team members. And my staff here that works with me now will laugh when I say this, but words matter, right? They hate it when I edit. But I love to edit because in the end, words matter. And so what we did, and I'll point you to the lower part of this first tab. This is a little bit inside information on Great Plains Software. I looked at this and I thought if you were a surfer, you'd either decide that you're about to have the ride of your life, or this is a tsunami that's just about ready to kill you. And we've all been probably through economic times where the challenge is there to survive. Well, those of us that have been through aggressive growth like this, if you did the math on this, this is 40% growth for about 20 years in a row. You just think about it, and that puts a strain on any organization. And so one of the ways we managed that strain was to say, you know what, we are going to work really hard to bring people into this organization that reflect why we're there in the first place. And how we did that was to define a set of shared values. And I've shared those with you here. We'll foster close relationships with our partners and customers. We'll encourage innovation, independent action, team spirit. We'll ensure everything that we do reflects quality, and we'll demonstrate integrity in all business relationships. The way I think about these, and Jim Legler's here. Jim, I got to give many tours to his students over the years at Great Plains Software and at Microsoft. And I always use 4 words to describe the culture and the values. It was about relationships, it was about innovation, quality, and integrity. And if you think about it, if we're a relational organization and we hold relationships high, but we anchor it in integrity, well, all of a sudden, our partners and our customers have an expectation of what it means to do business with us. And so it worked. And we were determined from the beginning not to just put these words on paper, but to live them out within the work that we did. And so in a way, we looked for all kinds of ways to make those values actions within the business that we carried out. It was, I think, not until the mid-90s that we found a model that helped us think about this better. How many of you have done strength finders? Oh yeah, I expected this group that would be well represented. Well, strength finders doesn't give you new strengths, right? It just identifies the strengths that you have. In a sense, this model that is kind of captured here in the middle, all these cogs together, this was a way of thinking about not necessarily an organizational culture model that was anything new. It just gave us a tool to understand what we had already. Now, in the world of Great Plains, you might expect that things like rules and policies weren't high on our list. We were way more about rewards and recognition. We were about ceremonies and events. We were about kind of the relational piece. Rules and policies, not so much. And, you know, I'm not sure where you are in your organizations. But this piece got turned into something that helped us manage and understand our organization's culture even better. Because one of the things that happened to us was that in the summer of 1997, we went public, which I will tell you has a little bit of an impact on relational versus transactional. For those of you that have been there, there's a transactional accountability, which is always at a little bit of a tug between where you want to be relationally and where you have to be transactionally. But it also meant that we had what was called equity capital. We could go out and acquire companies because all of a sudden it wasn't cash that we necessarily needed, we had equity value. So we turned this framework of culture into a way of assessing companies that we were looking into. And it worked beautifully. It gave us insights into these organizations that we wouldn't have had without this framework. But then let's take a look at how we as an organization turn some of those values into actions. And I could probably talk for the rest of the afternoon on different things. But the first and maybe the foremost, longest impact was this idea of just values-based interviewing. How many of you have been in what would be called a behavioral-based interview? Tell me about a time when, and then you fill in the blank relative to the question asked. We use that as a way of selecting team members. Do I remember right, Jenny? You were directly involved in that. But we took a little bit of a twist on it and said, we asked questions that gave us insight into their personal values. So it wasn't just behaviors, it was what was that value behind the behavior. And if you think again back to this riding a wave sort of thing, the only way you do that, and do that well, is to continue to bring in people that reflect the value that you hold. And so we did things like, again, values-based interviewing. If we had more time today, and Leanne's going to roll her eyes, I'd tell you the Hugo the White Rat story. The short story is that when I was here at Concordia, I was also a psychology minor. I loved it. I even toyed with the idea of being a psychology major until I realized, you know, the career opportunities there were probably not where I wanted to go. But I got a chance to train a white rat to dunk a basketball, so to speak. Now, you don't do that by shaking the cage and smacking it and getting it to do that over time. You do it with positive reinforcement, with giving that little rat an idea of what it means to eventually push a ball across the cage, pick up the ball in its front feet, stand up, and dunk it through a little basket that we'd made. It stuck with me ever since. That was 30-some years ago. But the idea of reinforcing positive behavior was what we captured within our recognition program. And so I took a liberty here of highlighting 3 different awards that we gave. The Heritage Award. It really talks about customer service, and as that last line says, from the beginning, our heritage was customer service. Back to this relational thing. Riding shotgun. It was about excellence in partner success. You'll love this one, the Jesse James Award. This was Doug Burgum, the rogue leader, right? Why would you choose Jesse James? Well, because you could talk about taking chances, acting with daring, and breaking old rules to introduce new opportunities. It was always interesting who was going to get the Jesse James Award. We also did things like quarterly excellence awards. And again, I'm going to pick on Jenny here because I'm quite certain I remember when she was an intern in our organization, she got a quarterly excellence award for something. I don't even remember what it was. But Jenny Bonesack Olson, as a college student interning at our organization, was put on a pedestal and said, this is the type of behavior that is noteworthy. And if you think about it, if you pick, we had, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 different award categories that did everything from business planning to customer relations, all these things. Every year, we pulled the best of the best. We actually polled the rest of the team members to say, who's doing it well? That feedback came to us. We put them on the stage and said, this is what great performance is. I am convinced today it's one of the most significant things we did over that period of time to make our values come alive and also to influence the people that were there, because one, we hired people that sort of reflected those values in the first place, and we gave them a chance to shine within our organization. Let me pause to make sure that, like Ernie, I'm not going too far off stray. One last point. There was a component of our organization that was compensation. So what I've noted here is that from the very beginning, we instituted a profit-sharing plan that awarded the entire team based on us succeeding. Back to our second shared value, which is about innovation and team spirit. Well, we just said if we all succeed, then we're all going to benefit. Another thing was that to move or think of an idea of as non-transactional, we awarded executive bonuses based on customer satisfaction. Those of you who, if you're in business, customer satisfaction is not a transactional measure. There's no way that you get it unless you seek it. You literally have to go out and ask, how is this going for you? We not only said it's important for us to understand how customers are experiencing this Great Plains Software relationship, but more important than that, we're tying bonuses to it. We're tying financial rewards. So for us, it became part of that culture. Now, let me pause for a moment and reflect on the reason why we're here, this idea of integrating faith and work. And as I reflected on it, there was never a time in my days in the organization where I felt I had to check my faith at the door. Again, back to this idea of an organization that built its culture around relationships and anchored in integrity. There was nothing that challenged my integrity in a faith-based way. I look back also, again, in this idea of looking through the rearview mirror. I had a chance to work with some of the most incredible people I've ever met. These were people like Catherine Kay Burgum, Doug's mom, Brad Burgum, his brother, Joe Peltier, a cousin, Mike Barner. Now, the unique thing on all of them is I've attended all of their funerals, unfortunately. But when I think of them as people, both in the work relations with them, and when I think of what was described of them at the celebrations of their lives, these were people whose Christian faith was part of who they were. It wasn't like they wore it on their sleeve. It wasn't like we had devotions at the beginning of board meetings. It wasn't anything like that. But it was very clear that the way they lived and the decisions they made, the relationships they managed, it was about faith in the workplace. Rick Burgum, I don't know if you know Rick. I just met with him again a couple weeks ago, and he always calls me Slette. But back in the early 90s, I'd been elected president of the congregation I was in. And I get this little note from Rick. Rick was president of the family corporation, member of our board of directors from the very beginning. Here's what the note said. Slette, it's important to take time to do the Lord's work. We never had a conversation about the Lord's work within our board meetings. But here's a guy who sees the fact that I'm, in my off hours, involved in the church organization, and he takes time to say to me, it's good that you do that. One last comment on Great Plains, because I do want to spend just a little bit of time on Oak Grove Lutheran School. But you'll notice at the bottom of this sheet here a little picture of Fortune magazine. There were 4 times in the 1990s where Great Plains Software got named one of the 100 best companies to work for in America. We were in a book, I think, in 1993, and if I recall, we were number 87. Then Fortune magazine took it over. This was a book that had been published, I think, about every 5 years. In 98, 99, and 2000, we were there again. Fargo, North Dakota, Great Plains Software. We went from upper 80s to, what was it, number 53 to number 30, and on this publication, we ended up number 15. Well, the next year, we acquired our biggest competitor in North America, which disqualified us because we had too many people that were new to the organization, and by the next year, we were Microsoft Business Solutions. So our march to the top sort of ended with that publication and number 15. I'd say the NDSU Bison have nothing over us because I count that as sort of a four-peat. But when I look back over that time, I'm drawn to a quote that came from Peter Schutz, who was actually, I think, the only American who headed Porsche back in the day. And he said that the only competitive advantage any company has is to get extraordinary results out of ordinary people. And I look back at that time and say that I think we did a pretty good job of doing that. And if I were to pin it on one thing, it would be that we had a mission statement that gave us an understanding of why we're there and a set of shared values that united us and brought like-minded people with all kinds of skills together. But it was a powerful, powerful thing. Now, I will take a couple minutes just to talk about Oak Grove Lutheran School. That's the backside of this little handout. And I get asked all the time, how does someone who spent 27 years in high tech end up as president of a local private school? And maybe I'll just say it's the guiding hand of God that you can never quite see what's going on. But I'll also tell you that when the first question came to me whether I'd be interested, my immediate response was to look at the organization's mission statement. Well, surprise, surprise, right? But it was to do that. So I went out to their website, I read about the mission statement, and in about 15 seconds, I realized that that wasn't a disconnect. And, in spite of the ups and downs of Oak Grove, which Hiram captured quite well in his book, Century in the Park, I looked at that mission statement and said, this is something very special. How many of you have read Simon's Sinek? I know Leanne has, there's a few others. Start with Why is one of his books. And what he would contend is that too many organizations focus on what they do or how they do it and never quite get to why. Now, I look at mission statements as this very reason of saying, well, here's how you get to why. You might look at the Oak Grove mission statement and say, well, it sort of sounds like what you do. But I think at the heart of it, it gets to the why, which is maybe captured in this Venn diagram. This idea that we blend academics, faith, and service in a way that is unique in an educational experience, and so unique that it defines why we're there in the first place. So as I jumped into this role at Oak Grove, I was clearly drawn to the mission, but what was also missing for me was this idea of the shared values of the school. They weren't anywhere. They weren't anywhere in a written form. They were all over the place in the relationships, in the history, in the teachers that had been there 30-some years. This morning, a grad from 1947 found her way up to third floor Jackson and found Nikki and said, I want to bring a $1,000 check for Giving Hearts Day. Well, Giving Hearts Day was yesterday, but that doesn't matter. It's this spirit of someone who her entire life has lived about 4 blocks east of the school. But she made her way, it didn't matter it was a day late, to bring us a $1,000 check. And I'm blown away. But it was the sort of the value of that experience that brought her there. But for me, it wasn't just good enough to say, let's just enjoy kind of the unstated part of this school. Let's write it down. So I actually recall a faculty and staff meeting. Darren might remember that too. The first summer I was there, got in front of the group and said, you know what we're going to do over the next year? We're going to identify the shared values of Oak Grove Lutheran School. And so we did a brainstorming there. We did a brainstorming with Paul and Roger and others on the at the board level. I had more coffee over conversations to say, what's that experience like at Oak Grove? What would make someone who graduated in 47 walk on a cold day across our campus to bring us a check? And so we went through probably 15 months worth of dialogue and again, down to this idea that words matter. We captured it, and that will be the last thing I'll just point you to, which is a set of shared values here: relationships, community, character, courage and curiosity, faith and reason, service and leadership. And as you read those, you'll get a sense for sort of there's a journey captured even within them, which is building off of our mission statement that says we're here to nurture students. We're here to express God's love, but here's how we're going to do it. And I know our teachers and administrators talk about a phrase that says, students don't care what you know unless they know that you care. Well, here's an example. Michelle Fornes, I think one of the best high school English teachers in the metro area, got up in front of our middle school and high school students at chapel this year, early on in our school year. And what's the first thing out of her mouth? You kids got to know that we love you. We don't always love what you do, but we love you. And if you're a teacher looking to build relationships that's going to unite a community and that's going to build character and sort of continue that flow, there's no better place to start. And so at Oak Grove, I couldn't go on to tell you all the things that would be comparable to some of the things that we did at Great Plains. But I will tell you that the shared values are a powerful part of what we're doing today and will be going forward. I hope well beyond the time that I'm there, because that, in a sense, is what we're trying to define, is that experience that gets captured in values and lived out in the actions of people that are there. So, with that, I thank you for the chance to share a couple stories today, and I would invite you, if you're in an organization today that doesn't have the mission or values that you'd like, either change it or go to a place where you can connect. Thank you very much.
And now we have time to ask these wise gentlemen a few questions.
I was 72 years old back in 2006 when the Oak Grove history came out. And at that time, I learned something that was reflected so much in what I heard today. I realized that there was a reason why Oak Grove survived. It had gone through and it was at the bottom all the time, never going, never going, never going. And then came the flood of '97. And in the flood of '97, in 6 months, they got more contributions than in their first 44 years of history. And I realized then God had a purpose for that school. And I wish Doug would have been here today to hear what was said. And I've said to Mike many times, you are the ideal person to come into the picture. And God has a purpose for that school. And that's what we're not following today in our society. If my words have anything to say, thank you.
Thank you, Hiram. By the way, just a note on that, Doug had experienced some health issues over the last several weeks, got back to the Fargo-Moorhead just a couple days ago, and assured him that the cameras would be on and that he would be able to hear this at some point in time.
I might briefly. Can we get this one on, please? I'll use my preaching voice. I was on the Board of Regents at Oak Grove in '97. It was a tough time, and when you walked those dikes, and people were, in some cases, almost risking their lives around the clock, and then the dikes that we didn't have any control over burst, and it cost us. Those were hard decisions and hard discussions, and we were just overwhelmed. So I'll just second what you said. It's just overwhelming with the response of the community and the fact that this gave the school a new lease on life.
I think the two of you should put together Luther's two-kingdom theory, and because that's what you're doing, living it out. I don't think most Lutherans have a clue about how it really plays out, and so I think the two of you should collaborate.
We're a good team.
This fact-value dichotomy is so huge, and just most people live it out in a very unhealthy way, and so I think you should collaborate on something.
Thank you.
All right, questions?
Hi, I really enjoyed both of your talks. I just have a question about, doing business in like the secular world, but like having a God, based or a faith-based mission statement. Like, how would you? Because if that was going to be on our website, for example, that people could easily look up, I struggle to balance. Like, I don't want to offend a bunch of people and hurt our company in a way, but I also do want to communicate that that's what grounds us. So, I mean, how do you balance that without getting to be a faith-based organization?
It's a great question, and under this idea of words matter, in the conversation Ernie and I had a few weeks ago, we talked about the word integrity, which is, if I understand the source, the idea of integrating your values in your actions, integrity. And so one way I'd suggest is just use that word. Your faith background that drives you can be reflected in your integrity, and you don't have to offend anybody, but you also just put it out there that here's who I am, here's what my organization is about, and it reflects my personal integrity. If they ask, you've got a foundation for it.
Let me just briefly add, especially the millennial generation, they're looking for coherence and authenticity. So it's one thing to have it on a website. It's another thing to see it embodied in the operations and in the company or in their relations with customers or however. I'm often, when a question like this comes, I'm often reminded of the observation in the early Roman Empire when Christianity was a minority and even a suspect minority because they were considered, because they didn't want to sacrifice to Caesar as a god, they were considered treasonous, not just heretical. And yet the Romans could not believe how they cared for one another, and even for those who were not in their own immediate circle. And so it wasn't so much that there was a more sophisticated philosophy or theology that Christians were articulating. There were a lot of those around. I won't take time to enumerate them, but it was how they lived out what they believed, up to and including willing to go to death for what they believed. So I think that it's that transition. It's that spiritual in the material. It's not divorced from it. There's too much pressure, has been for a long time, to say, well, you do this on Sunday, and how do you get Sunday morning and Monday morning and Sunday morning together kind of thing. It's that coherence. So I think how the how they perceive you embodying that mission statement is really the key.
Any other questions?
To address your situation, I lived in Alexandria, Minnesota for several years, and there was a huge movement. If you go out to Douglas Machine's website, huge faith-based mission statement on their website. I mean, just something that you may be able to look at, and I mean, many private companies could certainly emulate.
I'd like to ask you, Mike, if you would explore a little bit of the background that you had at Great Plains in terms of hiring, and some of those questions that really shaped the organization, how you brought that over to Oak Grove, and if who you are as a leader was shaped by your experience at Great Plains. There's a continuity that continues. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I think there's definitely a continuity that continues. The simple question or the simple process of how you hire falls into a category. I swipe it from Southwest Airlines, who was at or near the top of the list of 100 best companies for all those years. Their phrase was hire for attitude, train for skill. If you ask Darren Roach over here, our high school principal, about how, and Nancy and others, how do they go about choosing teachers? We hire teachers for fit. Of course, we're obviously looking for science skills or math skills. I mean, we're not going to train for skill quite like a baggage handler at Southwest Airlines. But first and foremost, we'll look for that fit, that attitude, that ability, and really part of the top of our list for us is much like, well, whether it was the elevator or Great Plains, it's relational. If you can't have that relational interaction with students, you probably don't belong in our organization, because it's the underpinning of everything we do. It's where it starts. And so I think part of who I am today as a leader is reflected in that experience within Great Plains Software, and hopefully bringing it in a different way. You know, values are specific to an organization. There's maybe a lot of commonalities, but they have to be specific to why that organization exists in the first place. So it has to be lived out in a way that's representative of that organization. Yeah, how do you transpose high tech? I went from accounting through various careers there into a private school, a private Lutheran school. It's just taking a concept and reapplying it. And it's 1 o'clock, isn't it, Faith?
Join me in thanking these wise teachers for a wonderful class.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to highlight, next month we'll have a very wise woman speaking with us, Sister Thomas Wilder, President Emeritus of University of Mary. And for those of you that don't know, we've started having these events in Bismarck, so let your Bismarck friends know that we show up there once a semester, bringing them some wisdom and some inspiration. And finally, in April, we'll have a longer conversation, time for a longer conversation in a half-day conference on engaging religious and cultural diversity at work. And Howard will be one of the speakers, as will Ode, who's down there, and several other people. So I encourage you to please make the time to be with us, April 17th from 7:30 in the morning, starting with breakfast, into the luncheon as usual. Thank you so much for coming today, and thank you, Mike and Annie, for a wonderful, wonderful class. Thank you.